We love the trails, but we know our footprints leave a mark. How do we protect the wild places we run in without losing our minds or our hobby? I'm Laura Briggs, and this is Storytime with the Green Runners. Join me as I talk to the trailblazers and everyday heroes taking imperfect actions for a healthier planet. Let's get into today's story. Welcome to the show, where today we have a guest who has spent his life wearing two brilliant intertwined hats. To the literary world, he's an award-winning journalist and author who has travelled from the high-altitude training camps of Kenya to the corporate running tracks of Japan to uncover the mysteries of human endurance. But to the running community, he's a man who simply loves to push his body to the limit, whether that's surviving the scorching sands of an ultramarathon in Oman or running 1,400 miles all the way around Ireland. Please welcome the wonderful Adharanand Finn.
Thank you.
Hi, Adharanand. It's an absolute joy to have you here. Now, before we dive into the deep history of your global adventures, I have to ask you how you're recovering from your latest marathon, not the running kind, but the writing kind, your latest book.
Yeah. Well, I love the writing process, actually. I find that I'm always going into these talks where people want to know the similarities between ultra running and writing a book. But I actually think they're very different, and I find the writing process much easier.
So the latest book is the running pilgrim, isn't it? And it's
The Running Pilgrim. Yeah,
set to hit the shelves in February 2027.
Yeah.
How hard has it been to write this book after your first three? Has it been a different process this time around?
Not really. The first one was the most difficult one because I had no idea what I was doing. But I learned a lot of lessons from that. And I mean, this one, the narrative is pretty linear because I did think, how can I, construct a different narrative because I run around Ireland, but basically the narrative is day by day going around Ireland. So it was pretty set, and I just had to. And luckily, while I was doing the run, so it was 7 weeks running around Ireland. Every night I sat down and I wrote notes. So I had also audio notes. I had books and books of notes. So it was just a matter of going through all those. I mean, that is a bit of a laborious process. I mean, it is an unwieldy thing. A book, you get so big that you start forgetting, where things are, and if you just want to decide to read it again, that obviously can take 2 weeks. So it's a slow process, but I do enjoy the process. And I've just finished the final draft about 2 weeks ago. Sent that in to the editor. They're all happy with it, so they're doing the copy editing now, designing the cover, that kind of stuff. So it's quite exciting. We've got to the exciting stage now. Fabulous.
And you also asked readers of your Substack and your community to kind of share their ideas with you as well, didn't you? Was that something new that you brought to this particular book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was particularly about the title. I wasn't sold on the title initially, The Running Pilgrim. That was what I think it was a running pilgrimage initially. So I was kind of casting around for ideas for other names, and then I ended up doing a poll. But yeah, I've started the Substack and the Patreon about 3 or 4 years ago. So I didn't have it when I was doing my other books. But it's a real community of people who obviously they're signed up to particularly with the paid subscribers, they obviously care enough about my writing and know enough about my writing to be quite invested in it. If they're willing to pay to be part of the community. So I feel like they're all people who are going to give it time and thought, and they're not just some random person on Twitter who I've got no idea why he's given the opinion he's given. They're all people who semi-invested at least. So yeah, it was nice to kind of knock around some ideas, get some thoughts on the titles. I may have shared some other ideas. I can't quite remember. I definitely, while I was running through Ireland, I was still doing. So I do a weekly column on there, and I was still doing that while I was in Ireland, as well as doing video updates. So there was probably some feedback happening here and there. Anyway, I can't quite remember.
So running around Ireland, you run all over the world for your other books as well. I mean, this is, this encompasses you, this kind of free living runner. Is that how you've always been? I mean, you were a journalist with The Guardian for many years, weren't you? So
Yeah.
I'm sensing that there was a kind of a different Adharanand before running. Can you give us a little bit of your history?
Uh, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, that's a good one. I mean, when I worked at The Guardian, I was always part-time. So I always, and the intention was that I would do, didn't want to be committed 100% to just like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So I always left myself this chink of space with this hope that I would do something else with it. And initially it was freelance journalism I was doing on the other days. So I was part-time, had a job. It was, I wasn't a writer at The Guardian, I was an editor at The Guardian. Before that, I was actually at ITN when I first started doing this. And then yeah, it was freelance journalism. And then that kind of, as a freelance journalist, I was writing features mainly. The kind of dream was to write a book, and I was casting around for subjects. And so there was always that dream of having a freer life, I think. I think my partner as well is very adventurous. So a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you must have a very understanding wife," but actually, she's the one often like nudging me to take a few more risks and take a few more, to step outside the safety zone. So when the first book was Kenya, so when we decided we were going to go and live in Kenya, I was an unknown writer, so it was a very tiny advance I got. It meant taking 6 months off work, unpaid, moving the entire family to Kenya. So it was a huge risk, but she was completely up for that as well. She was almost, I probably was a little bit more cautious of that. I was like, is this wise? Are we being crazy here? She was like, no, let's do it. We want to live an adventurous life. So I feel like it was always there. Obviously, bills have to be paid, and you've got to earn money. So there's always been that tension, like I've got to earn money. But luckily I managed to turn the passion into the job. It's quite funny, actually. While I was running around Ireland, so it was 70 days, so 10 weeks in Ireland. And I remember in one pub, I was telling, I ended up talking to these guys. I was in my running gear, so they're like, "What are you doing?" And I explain it all. And the guy says to me, "I don't mean to be funny," he said, "but what kind of job do you have that means you can go and run around Ireland for 10 weeks? And I said, "Well, actually, this is my job." So that's it's the magic trick I managed to pull off somehow along the way.
It feels to me like you manifested this life for yourself. You always knew that, by keeping those windows of opportunity in your freelance work, that this was always meant to be. That's how you planned it. And so great that you've got such a supportive family who are like-minded, and that you can just go off and do it.
I mean, we've definitely paid the price in that, we have never had enough money to buy a house, and we've kind of traded off a bit of freedom for a bit of financial security. But to be honest, I never really believed I was going to get the book contract. I kind of, even when I was pitching it and coming up with the idea, it actually took me about 5 years to fully pitch the book, from initially pitching it and then getting told, "Oh, you need to work on your pitch, you need to go and write a sample chapter." It took me about 5 years because I didn't fully believe it would ever happen. It just seemed so pie in the sky that I would be able to actually write a book. I feel like that was definitely in the days before self-publishing, where because maybe I would have done that, but I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know anyone. I don't think I'd ever heard of self-publishing. So it seemed like an almost impossible dream. But at the same time, I kept that space. You're right. I kept that space for it to be possible. I had to keep the possibility alive that I could do this, and keep doing something towards it as well. The writing. So I did actually write a novel as well in that period, which didn't get published. But so I was always pushing for. I guess I had this creative or need to be doing something for myself. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. I kept that space alive, but I didn't fully believe it. I just seemed a bit of a pipe dream. And so when it happened, when we got the publishing deal, I remember ringing my wife up and going, they want to buy it. They're giving me money to go to Kenya. We're going to Kenya. I'm going to write a book. I was like, I can't actually believe this is happening, but it did.
That's amazing. But it's not just running books you've written, right? Because from a little bit of our digging, we found that you've written a book about kind of environmental awareness in the workplace. So So you've always obviously had a connection to that kind of wanting to write a book and the green agenda. Tell us how that kind of came about.
Okay, yeah, this is a funny story because yeah, if you look me up on Amazon, there is a very little red book that I wrote years ago. It's a slightly different model, so it was contract publishing. So I just got paid a flat fee. They gave me the structure of the book, the title of the book, all the materials, and they gave me like 4 weeks. Here's all the information. It was even before like proper internet, so I had to go to their office and get a wad of pamphlets and leaflets and eco, documents about, about, I don't know, half a meter high. And I had to take those home with me and go through them and write a book. I think there was a bit of online research as well. But yeah, initially so when I was trying to be a freelance journalist, I was deciding, which area to go into. And I was drawn to environmental journalism. And so I was writing a lot of pieces about how to be eco. I had small children, so there was a lot about being eco as a family. I wrote about these cargo bikes. Like, could you get rid of the car and just have a cargo bike? And we road tested all these cargo bikes around London with my small children as the guinea pigs. And also, so I ended up with a column in The Guardian called The Green Worker. And so I would write every Monday a piece about being green at work. And so this publishing company just said, could you write a book about that? So the book is called Make a Difference at Work. But yeah, this contract publishing, it's less about the author. It's an informational book. So it doesn't even have my name on the cover, but it is under, if you search for it, it does have me as the author. But yeah, I was very interested in the environmental side of things. And what happened is, I mean, I can tell you the story how I pivoted from environmental journalism to running journalism. There were two things happened. One, I'd always been a runner. When I was a kid, I was a runner. From 9 years old, I was running like county championships and running national championships and stuff. So I'd always loved running. I'd always had this fascination with the Kenyans, but I'd kind of given it up in my 20s. And I still would run a bit. Like I'd run at least once a week, to be honest, but I didn't compete. But I had this harking after going back into running. In fact, I lived in London. I went to watch the London Marathon, and that sparked like this. Oh, this used to be my thing, and look at all these people doing it, and they're having this amazing experience. And so I started writing. I realized runners. Oh, I'm skipping around, but then I ended up moving. We ended up moving to southwest England, and I remember reading Runner's World on the train home one time because I was still working in London. And I saw they had these race reports from all around the country, and they didn't seem to have any from the southwest. So I messaged them and said, well, I've just moved to the southwest. You don't seem to do many race reports from the southwest. And so they got me doing the race reports for the southwest. And that was brilliant because I had now had an excuse to not only to race, but then if I was going to race, I had to train. I couldn't and we had small children, so my wife's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I've got this race coming up. I can't just do it. I have to train for it." So I had this impetus, which was not just me doing my thing. It was like this was part of my job now. But at the same time, in the environmental journalism world, the subject was getting bigger and bigger and more pressing. And there were people like George Monbiot coming along who had all the kind of science background and had real sense of. I was just writing kind of purely from my own experiences. And there were more and more people doing that. There were more and more people writing about the eco, how to live eco, and I just started feeling a bit pushed out, and also not having. I mean, some of these journalists were so good, and they were so on it completely. While I was doing this on the side, I still had my day job, and they were like going. Next thing they were on Question Time, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting really pushed out of this space. But I was really enjoying writing about the running. Oh yeah, and then what happened is I one of these races I was doing a race report for. I ended up winning the race. So then I wrote a whole feature on the reviewer winning the race, and that was quite funny. And I just it just got more and more pushed in that direction. People enjoyed the writing about the running, and then I came up with a book idea. That was basically about running, not environmental stuff.
Which, of course, leads us nicely onto the book Running with the Kenyans,
Yeah,
where you basically find yourself kind of mid-30s,
yeah,
uprooting your family,
yeah.
moving out to Kenya. How was that experience for you all?
Well, that was pretty intense. So these days you can go to this town, Iten, where where we went, and there are quite a lot of foreigners there. People go there on running holidays, but up until then, nobody had done that. There were some foreign elite runners there. The British, while I was there, actually, the British team were there. But yeah, they hadn't ever seen amateur runners, and they certainly hadn't ever seen white children before. So whenever we walked around the town, and my children all had really blonde, like white hair, because they were like 2, 5, and 7, so they were tiny or something like that. The youngest was 1 actually when we got there.
Okay.
And so the people would just come, like we couldn't go anywhere. Just going to the market was like a 5-hour trip, even though it was like 200 meters from our house. Everybody wanted to hold them, play with their hair. So it was quite intense for them. I mean, it was all good natured. It was there was no sense of danger or sense of intimidation. It was all very good natured. But for the children, and none of my children ever seemed like they never seemed to want to be the center of attention generally in life. They've all been like that. So they struggled with it a little bit. And then what happened, I write about this in the book, there's a moment where they go into a local hairdresser and they get their hair braided. And suddenly it feels like they suddenly think they're like, they've gone local, even though nobody there had braided hair. But I guess they didn't have the big fluffy blonde hair anymore. It was all neatly patted away. And so they kind of went incognito. And then they really got in with the local kids suddenly. And they ended up going to the local school because they made really good friends with two of the girls who lived nearby, and they said, "You've got to come to our school." And that was a crazy experience. I mean, there were 50 kids in a class, everything in Swahili. And also the 2 friends they made were about 4 years older than them, so they were in a class with much bigger kids. My kids could barely write their names at that point. All the other classes just wanted to. All the other classes were coming out of their lessons and peering in the window of the class my kids were in. But yeah, it was. I think it's a wonderful experience for them to have gone through that and to have come through full circle from finding it quite difficult to actually feeling like they belong there. And I remember it got to the point where they would just run out of the house and around the neighborhood. And it was a really local neighborhood, wooden shack, people living in wooden shacks and stuff. We had a semi-nice house, which was owned by a politician, and someone had been living in there. He'd kicked them out so we could move in there. I think the guy he'd just been tending the garden. He hadn't actually been paying rent.
Oh.
And so it was a semi-nice house, but it wasn't, by Western standards, it was, there was no hot water. The electricity would go out all the time. But then the kids would go off with their friends who lived in these wooden shacks, and they just became so local that you'd see people coming through the neighborhood who weren't from around there, who would see these two little white kids with like braided hair running around with all the other kids, like playing games, jumping over fences and stuff. You see the confused look on their faces. So it was wonderful, yeah. And the people there were incredible because we were advised not to live there. We were told you can't live there as a white family. It's way too dangerous. I mean, by people who live in Kenya, who told us it was impossible. This is, you've got to go and live in Eldoret, which is the nearby city, which has gated communities. That's the only house, that you'd be safe in with small children. And I just thought, I don't want to go there and write about the runners, but live separate from them. I feel like I want to be in the town. And so we took a risk, and it wasn't a risk in the end. It was just the perception that you couldn't live there.
Was there ever a moment when you thought, what on earth have I done? Like, what have I done to my family? Or were you just completely at ease that whole time?
Uh, Not really. Yeah, I think they were having even when it was intense. Like I say, it was never intimidating. It was never scary. So I don't think there was ever any sense of danger. The only thing I thought about what have I done was when I'd been there about 2 months and I realized I'd no idea how to write a book. And I was like, I got into real panic. I was like, because initially I got there and everything was exciting. So I was writing about arriving in Kenya, going for my first run. Then I did a race that was exciting. And then I went for another run, and then I went for another run, and I was like, "Well, this book is just going to be me going for a run." Initially, that was exciting, but what am I just going to write that over and over? I was like, "What am I doing? What have I done?" I was literally, I've sold this book, but I've got no idea. I've sold it. I've been paid. I brought you all out here to do something I've got no idea how to do, and I was having a real crisis there. And actually, that's when I came up with the idea to set up a team because I was always going to do this Lewa marathon, at the end of the book. So at the end of the book, I did my first marathon in Kenya, and I was always going to do that. But I suddenly thought there were loads and the thousands of runners in this town, and the thing they all want is the opportunity to do a race. They're not looking for charity. Nobody ever asks you for money, but they always ask you, "Can you get us a race? Can you get us a race?" And I thought, well, I'm doing a race. It wouldn't be much effort to get like 5 or 6 people together to travel. It was on the other side of Kenya, but we were just going to drive to the other side of Kenya with a bunch of people. In fact, that would be fun. That'd be much more fun to do it as a team. And so that then suddenly gave me a narrative to the whole book, which it wasn't just me getting there and training. It was also these people's lives and their story to get to this race. And they were quite, I ended up getting a really interesting collection of runners from different backgrounds, some who had been successful. One guy had come second in the New York Marathon. Other people who'd never run a race before because they just hadn't had the opportunity. And it was great to tell their stories. And then that's when I started calming down again. I was like, okay, here, we've got a story here. There's a story in this here. So, but that was my main crisis. But the children were amazing. Yeah, they just adapted. But like I say, the town itself, I don't know if every town in Kenya would have been like that, but Iten certainly was at that point. The people were amazing. I don't know if we just got lucky, but our neighborhood, everybody was wonderful and welcomed us. And they were slightly confused by me being, what I was doing. I don't think they quite got the concept of writing a book about them. And so they always, because I was running, but I wasn't running very fast.
In comparison to them, maybe.
Well, exactly. And there aren't any there weren't then at that point any amateur runners there. So the idea that if you can't win a race that you would run, why would you do that?
Why would you bother?
Yeah. So I was confusing to them. And then then I'd say, well, I'm writing a book. In fact, when I went to at one point I went to Nairobi and went to some of the running camps in Nairobi, and the guy who was hosting me was a English guy who'd lived there since the 1950s, and he was actually the IAAF drug tester at the time. So he took me around the camps, and he said, "Bring some books, show them, because they won't get it when you say you're writing a book, but just show them the books." Like, not my own books, obviously, but just books. I'm writing one of these. And it was interesting. They all got them out. And like, oh, you're writing one of these? Okay. And obviously, they knew what books were, but somehow, somehow that
didn't
made
kind of register.
Yeah. And then they go, oh, so we're going to be in one of these. But yeah. And then they were good.
So from thinking you might not be able to write a book when you get out there, it turns out that it was a roaring success and won loads of awards, and then your publishers wanted a second one.
Yeah.
So this then took you and your family again out to Japan.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Yeah, so it did really well. You're right. It got loads of awards and sold well, and the publishers was delighted. And so they initially said, "What about Ethiopia? Why don't you go to Ethiopia?" And I had actually spent 2 weeks in Ethiopia for that book, which most of it got cut out, unfortunately, from the final edit. Just the editors just thought it was just too much of a diversion. But it was a fascinating 2 weeks, and is on my Patreon if anyone wants to go and read it on Patreon. But so I just thought, but it was a very similar. I mean, obviously Ethiopia and Kenya are very, very different, but at the same time, the whole running world is very different as well. But it just seemed too similar. I thought, surely I can come up with something. I'm not just going to be the guy who, Kenya, Ethiopia, come up with another idea. And then I had this inkling about Japan and that they were really into running. And then the more I found out about it, the more interesting it seemed. So I pitched Japanese running, Ekiden running, the corporate world of running, the fact they turn the biggest races in Japan are relay races was a fascinating idea. But again, like I talked about my wife being quite adventurous. So when I told her, what about Japan? We go to Japan. It just didn't seem quite adventurous enough for her. So she thought about it and said, yeah, it doesn't excite me in the same way as Kenya, she said. But what about if we travel there on the train? I was like, what? She said, well, that would be cool, wouldn't it? And that was her idea. And by this time, the children were like 4. This was only 2 years later, so 4, 7, and 9. And the thought of traveling, so we had to travel right across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Express. We had a month. I can't remember why, but we had this month between when we could get to Japan and when I stopped work. Because again, so the Guardian were brilliant. They gave me a career break again. You're not supposed to get 2 of them, but they gave me a second one, which is 6 months unpaid leave. But then you still got your job when you get back. But somehow I had 7 months. I think I had loads of holiday that I hadn't taken or something. So we had I actually had 7 months. So she said, why don't you? But I could only get a 6 month visa. That was it. So we've got this month where we can't be in Japan, but we're not don't have to be here. So why don't we use that to travel there? So we traveled over land. We got the train in Devon, and we got off the train in Kyoto, which is
Oh,
obviously different
wow.
trains, a couple of ferries involved. Uh, some amazing adventures on the way up through Copenhagen. We had a great time in Finland. And it was true. It was an amazing way to see the world because there is that weird thing when you fly somewhere and suddenly, 1 minute you're in London, the next minute you're watching films, the next minute you're in Japan. It's it's a completely different time of day. Everything's different, completely different. And it feels like you just dropped out of the air, which you have literally. Whereas when you travel gradually over land, it's weird. Russia goes from Europe to Asia very slowly. Like the culture becomes more Asian, the people become more Asian, the food becomes more Asian as you travel across the continent, and you really get this sense of the gradual change and the sense of where Japan is. And I think the children as well must have this sense of like kind of ingrained sense of how big Russia is and how far away Japan is in a completely different way than if you fly there. So it was an amazing experience. It was tough some of the days on the Trans-Siberian Express. We were locked in a small compartment. People on the trains in Russia smoke, which is not that helpful when you've got small children and you're on the train for 3 days and the whole train carriage. That's basically being a bit smoky. Uh, but other than that, yeah, it was an adventure in itself. So then we arrived in Japan completely exhausted.
I can imagine that's a long journey by anyone's.
But also, we were carrying enough stuff for 6 months living in Japan, which included a winter in Japan, and this was traveling in the summer. So we had so many bags, it was ridiculous.
Wow.
We had six, and then like the children were, particularly the youngest, he was too small to carry his bag anyway. So we had to carry him, getting on and off trains. Especially, we had to change somewhere. We had to get off the train and on the next one quickly in a train station. That was just crazy. We were like holding the doors open and but yeah, there was. I mean, I could have written a book just on that itself, but of course, the editors were like, "Well, you're writing a book about Japan," and because initially I wrote the whole thing, and they were like, "We're halfway through the book here, and we haven't even got to Japan yet. I'm afraid we're going to have to cut this out." But Japan itself, you asked me about Japan itself. Yeah, Japan again was. It's a completely. The reason I love the idea of Japan is it's so different to Kenya, as you can imagine. I mean, it's almost like I almost feel like here in the UK, we're probably halfway between the two worlds. So I think Japan is as different in every other opposite way than Kenya's different. Like they're more organized, they're more punctual, they're more like precise. Everything is, whereas everything's chaotic and loosely and relaxed, everything's kind of stressy and
Mm.
and punctual and but brilliant. But so it was such a contrast. The children again went to school there, which was very difficult for them. But I have to say, my eldest daughter now is a bit of an ex. She'll hate me for saying this because she, for some reason, doesn't like people knowing, but she speaks Japanese. She did.
Fabulous.
She spent a term at Tokyo University recently. She's at university in London, but she did a term in Tokyo. She's just in Korea at the moment. So she's got some real feeling for Japan and that part of the world.
Well, it
Really
opened up
got
the world to your
yeah,
children,
yeah,
essentially, hasn't it?
yeah, yeah. Especially the eldest two, because the youngest he was so young, particularly for both trips, really that he was just kind of in this bubble of the family. He didn't go to the school in either place. But yeah, the eldest two, been to school in Kenya, they've been to school in Japan. They've really been in, as young children, been in some quite difficult situations, which I think at the time was definitely tough for them. They came back after the first day in Japan and they were like quite upset about how hard it had been.
Mm.
But they bravely went back the next day and after a while yeah, I mean my other daughter was in a play. I remember we went to see the play. yeah, we went to see this play, and we're sitting there, and I wasn't expecting her to have a speaking part. You know, she'd only been at the school 2 months, and suddenly she's in this play, and she's not only speaking in Japanese, but like direct, telling the other kids who maybe have forgotten their lines, like nudging them and stuff. I was
Wow.
just like, wow, this is amazing. And
That is incredible.
you pick them up after school, and they'd be just playing these games. Their classroom, they know Japanese never got good enough for them really to understand what was going on in the classroom, but they could do playground Japanese. So they would, once they got out of the classroom, they were playing and playing these games with the children and in Japanese and stuff. So yeah, they had an experience. It wasn't necessarily like going on a holiday and everything was wonderful, but
Yeah,
yeah,
what an experience though. So Japan, you write The Way of the Runner,
yeah,
and then you come back and you are basically given a commission from an editor at the Financial Times.
yeah,
Is that how the next bit happens?
yeah, pretty much. So yeah, obviously, so the Japan book, although I think it's just as good, something about Japan wasn't quite as, inspiring, I guess, or didn't grab people's attention in the same way. So it didn't sell quite as well. And you realize that you're only as good as your latest book, like with the publishers. I still had a lot of credits from the first book, and the second book was good. They didn't think I'd done a bad job, but it just wasn't selling as well. Uh, but the other thing about them, they were both based around like marathon running and road running, and and that was very much how I saw myself. I was a road runner. I'd done about 6 marathons by this point, lots of half marathons. I was all about times and getting faster. In fact, I broke all my PBs the year after Japan, and they're still all
Wow.
my PBs. So I was running really well at that kind of stuff. And so then, yeah, I guess I'd had this inkling about ultra running. I kept hearing about ultra running, but to me, I had zero interest in it. It was like, I'd watch videos of people doing ultra running, and they were walking, and they had bags on their backs, and they had poles. I was like, that's not running. To someone who'd been with like elite marathon, who'd been with like world record holders in the marathon, trained with them, and been to Japan, like that. Just I don't know what that was. That was not. I mean, I had no interest in that. But then the FT travel editor, the FT contacted me and said, did I want to run? Yeah, the Oman Desert Marathon. So it was 100 miles across the desert in Oman. And I just wrote straight back to him and said, "No, you've got the wrong person. I don't do that kind of running. I'm not that kind
Wow.
of runner." I was like, "No." And then I told my wife later that day. I said, "Oh, the FT contacted me, and they said, do you want to run the Amman Desert Marathon?" And she's less of a runner, so she's less fixed in her views of running. To her, it was just a running race, and it was like, so wait there. So the Financial Times, you've never written for, that sounds quite good to write for them. They're sending you on a race in Oman, which sounds quite fun. And you said no. It's like, don't people pay like, aren't those races like really expensive? Like people pay thousands of pounds to do those races, and you're getting offered a free place and getting paid to go. What? And I was like, so that just made me reconsider. And then I just started thinking about it as a runner, and in my running like guys, I wasn't that interested. But as a life experience, I thought, well, running across the desert, that would be a story to tell the grandchildren, right? You ran across the desert in Oman. That sounds. So I kind of went into it with that mindset. But then as soon as I got there, I got quite competitive, and I was doing very well. It was a 5-day race. I was doing very well up until day 4. I was in the top 20 actually, which I was quite pleased with.
Gosh.
And the top 20, and they were like elite, ultra runners, but I didn't consider them real runners, even though they were like guys who win the marathon des Sables and stuff. So I was definitely gunning for a higher position, and then I just totally fell to pieces on the long day. Couldn't cope at all. I finished nearly last that day, and then I barely struggled to the finish on the last day. And I remember thinking that is the worst experience of my life. I'm never doing that again. I hated every minute of that. But then something, and any ultra runner, this is the thing, any ultra will know this feeling, and then we'll know the feeling that a few days later you start thinking, yeah, what if I'd done that differently? And also the experience of it, of that being that rinsed, being that exhausted, being that wrecked. After a few days, you start thinking, well, that was pretty an amazing thing to have done, and that was an amazing thing to have been through, and actually, and I think I could do it better. And then I started thinking, well, maybe there's more in this ultra running, and maybe I went into it with the wrong attitude, and maybe if I did one where I took it a bit more seriously, And up until that point, I didn't even train on trails hardly. But I started trail running in Dartmoor, where I live, and started trying these ultra runs. I'm still not a natural ultra runner. So so Damien Hall is one of the founding green runners. I think I'd been say when I was working at the Guardian, he started pitching. That's how he got into write. Well, he was already a writer, but he started pitching pieces about the spine race, and then he went and did the spine race. So I knew about him, and we'd kind of talked and we'd run together, and we had quite similar times at 10K and half marathon and even marathon. His time wasn't much different to mine. And so then I started seeing that he'd been a writer. He started writing about ultra running, and then he'd ended up coming like top 10 at UTMB. So then I was thinking, oh, maybe in my mind, maybe I'll be like Damien Hall. I'll be like an elite ultra runner. This could be great. But unlike Damien, who gets better and better the further and further the race goes, I'm the opposite. The further and further the race goes, the worse and worse I get. So yeah, I'm mid-pack at best when it comes to ultra running. Often quite near the back of the pack for some reason. I just can't seem to translate my like I'm quite good at 10K, but I can't quite seem to translate that into ultra running. But I still love the experience and the challenge of it, and but yeah, I still go into it more. It's more of a life experience than a running race to me these
I
days.
was going to say that so writing this book, The Rise of the Ultra Runners, did that bring you a little bit more respect about ultra running? Because
Oh
it
my
sounds
God,
like you
yeah.
were absolutely against it, and
Oh yeah, I'm
now you can appreciate it.
yeah, I'm in awe of those guys. Well, anyone who can do it, but those yeah, people who do it, I know they're walking, but they're walking fast and they're running a lot of it. And yeah, I mean, so me and Damien had similar times over like even the marathon, but then we did the UTMB in the same year and he finished 20 hours ahead of me. I mean, it's nearly a whole day. I'd say, how did you do it so quickly? I mean, I can't quite fathom how they can keep going as quick as they do for as long as they do. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, yeah, I think those if you work in minutes per mile and you've only ever run a marathon, you've got to change your whole mindset. Yeah, an ultra race is. I mean, I ran some of Dan Lawson's Southwest Coast
Yeah.
Path with him, and yeah, because I'd also done a bit when Damien Hall had run the Southwest Coast Path, and I remember the bit I ran with him. That was in my early days before I think I'd done any ultra running, and it just seemed so slow. I was like, what is this? But now they were doing like 100K a day on the South Coast path. I mean, if I can do 30K in a day on that path, it's so undulating. That would be my max. They're like it's yeah, it's mind blowing what they
They're
can do.
machines. I
Yeah,
know. I
yeah,
mean, Damien Hall as well and Dan Lawson, they
yeah.
are pretty
I know.
brilliant at what they do,
So
I
you
have to
can't just
say.
take your minute per mile and extrapolate it and think, because it feels easy for like 5 miles to think, oh, that's going to be, I could just keep this going all day. But no, you can't.
So back to your running and your running around Ireland and your
Yeah,
latest book. Now you mentioned earlier that there was kind of some to and froing about the title with the publishers.
yeah,
So you've eventually settled on the title, The Running Pilgrim.
yeah.
So how does that title kind of reflect your running? Are you a person doing a pilgrimage or are you a pilgrim runner? How did you come about that title in the end? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, so it did come about through me discovering about so I had this plan to run the Self Transcendence 3100. Again, showing not enough quite enough respect to ultra runners. I thought I could do that. And then I did a 6 day race, thinking I could run 100K a day for 6 days, and I couldn't. But I had some amazing conversations in that race with some people who talked about this, and it's called the Self Transcendence 3100, about the kind of self transcendence experience you go through on these really long runs, these epic runs of like over 200 miles, say over days, and so I was really interested in that experience, and then I started reading these books. I mean, initially I came across the British Pilgrimage Trust online, and they were talking about pilgrimage as basically a similar experience. It's like a spiritual journey on foot, and you go on this long journey. I mean, they're only walking, but through walking, you kind of through the process of taking on this long journey, you start to experience the world in a different way. You start to experience yourself in a different way. And I felt that's very similar to what I was going for with the ultra running, particularly with these really long distance runs. And so I started thinking, well, I could go on a running pilgrimage rather than trying to you know be in a race or try and break any records. Just go on the journey. And because I felt like I was doing these races really for the experience. Like I said, I wasn't trying to compete. I was just doing them for the experience. But maybe the journey itself is the experience, and you don't need to break a time or beat a goal or be in a race. So I got really into this idea of going on a running pilgrimage, and then it was just a question of where would I do this? And I did think about going across the Pyrenees at one point, or going down through Spain, because obviously a lot of pilgrimage trails in Spain and stuff. But my parents are both Irish. I grew up feeling very Irish. I've got a lot of Irish family. Also, the fact that it was nearby and I didn't have to fly anywhere. By this point, I was much more aware of the kind of green runner ethos and thinking, well, it would be good to do something locally. I did think about doing it in the UK as well. And so Ireland made sense. There's a lot of, I felt like Ireland was a place I didn't really know, but I'd always felt I always told people when I was growing up that I was Irish, even though I don't do that so much anymore. I feel like if you've got an English accent, you can't say you're Irish. But because I was born and brought up in England, but my parents brought me up to feel very Irish, and so it was quite deep rooted. So I thought it'd be really nice to go and experience Ireland in this way, and so yeah, it just came out of that, and so the idea was not to have a rigid time goal, but it was just to go on this journey, experience the places, and then with a pilgrimage you kind of go from place to place. And so there were and the other idea with the British Pilgrimage Trust, they were saying a modern day pilgrimage, it can be a secular pilgrimage where it's not necessarily religious sites you're going to, but it could be like sites of immense beauty. And then I started expanding my view, like, well, places where people come together to commune. So that could be the pub, right? Particularly in
Love
Ireland,
that.
or a sports match, or even a running
Yeah.
race. Wherever people come together to kind of have a shared experience, and a beautiful waterfall, a mountaintop. In fact, they have holy mountains in Ireland. The Crowpatrick is the holy mountain, and so I went up there, and there are all these points of pilgrimage. But so yeah, I kind of each day I would have a place I was pilgrimaging to, and I made my way, yeah, around Ireland. It wasn't like I mean, for a non-runner, it is mind-blowing, but to like an elite ultra runner, it was probably quite casual. I was doing about between 20 and 25 miles a day on average. Some days were longer. So there was a lot of running. There was a lot of. I also wanted to get into that point of exhaustion, that feeling that I wasn't just touching the sides. I wanted to really feel like immersed in running. Like running had become my life, and it did. Yeah, I mean, it was 1,400 miles over 2,250 kilometers. So there's a lot of running. You really get a sense of that exhaustion, of that some moments where you kind of come through and you just feel invincible. You feel like you could run all day. Moments of real struggle. Yeah, so I wanted all that, and yeah, I feel like I got that. But it was also about the place and the people I would meet along the way, and that kind of stuff.
You wrote a gorgeous piece about your run in The Guardian,
Oh yeah,
saying that you'd always wanted to use running simply as a means of travel, a
yeah,
pilgrimage in search of meaning and connection, propelled entirely by your own two legs. And I love that because it stands in such stark contrast to the massive surge in running tourism that we're seeing at the minute.
yeah.
And I almost feel like maybe your running and your environmental writing are finally in synergy. Do you feel that you've reached that point now?
Yeah, there was definitely a point, and I talk a lot about it. Like, particularly in Ireland, there aren't actually that many trails. This is kind of mind-blowing to me, that there's no public right of way in Ireland. So you can't,
Wow.
every trail that exists, and there aren't many of them, are permissive paths, but the landowners can cut them down, shut them off at any point. And so often you find you're halfway along a trail and there's a big gate saying no entry. In which case I had to always climb over the gate and carry on because I was running around Ireland. I couldn't just go home. So I did a lot of trespassing, but it also meant I did a lot of running on the roads, and you get this sense like people look at you like you're strange. And there's a guy running on the road there, and you realize like I'm just I'm just using my legs to get around. It's not that strange. It shouldn't be that strange. And once upon a time, these roads were. I realized there's times where they were debating whether cars should be allowed on the roads. The roads weren't built for cars. They weren't. they don't belong. There's this thing that the cars own the road. They don't own the road. They've been allowed on the road and they've taken over
Mm,
basically. They bullied everyone. They're like bullies. They force everyone. I mean, I do drive a car as well, so I always think that when I'm driving the car. Yeah, I'm on the other side now. But
always get angry.
it was a really interesting perspective to be using the road on foot, and I felt like I must be one of the only people in Ireland at this moment in time who's using running as a means to get from place to place rather than either going for a run, which is fair enough, people are going for a run, or there are people hiking, but they're all hiking like on a hike. I'm going on a
Yeah.
hike. Well, I'm just actually using my legs to go from place to place. This is shouldn't be as crazy as as unusual as it is, and lots of the houses as well, I realized, had no there was no way to get from the house to anywhere on foot because they were on a main road and there was no
Gosh.
there was no footpath. I was like, this is a kind of crazy world we've created where you kind of almost have to be in a car unless you live in the city, obviously. So yeah, it was an interesting perspective, and I do talk a lot about that. I also talk yeah, in the book there's quite a lot of crossover. I end up spending time with a guy called Owen Dalton who wrote a book called An Irish Atlantic Rainforest, and he's rewilded a bit of land out there, and he talks a lot about how so Ireland is and I didn't know any of this at the time, but Ireland is the least biodiverse country in Europe. It's got the least forest coverage if you count genuine forests. It's got a lot of forestry land, which he doesn't count, and I don't count. So there were a lot of interesting environmental issues there, and a lot of the reason why Ireland is so deforested and so lacking biodiversity is its history being basically pillaged by the British. So
Mhm.
it's not entirely self-inflicted, but it is interesting how little effort has gone into rectifying the situation. And he says, like, in the UK so he was Irish living in Ireland, but he was saying, the UK is years ahead of Ireland in terms of its its foresight in terms of rewilding and just regenerating and protecting nature. So I'm interested to see when the book comes out. There was when that article was in the Guardian, there was a piece, an editorial in one of the main Irish newspapers the next day where they picked up on that particular point
Mm.
and basically using it as a jumping off point to have their own debate about whether Ireland really was such a terrible place lacking in biodiversity, and was this fair, and but the piece was really basically saying it's great that someone's bringing this up. This is a really important issue. So it might end up becoming a talking point out of the book completely.
Well, as I say, when I read that piece,
Mm.
I was shocked because
Yeah,
you think of Ireland as this
yeah,
green, lush land. So
yeah,
when you said it was so lacking in biodiversity, it certainly surprised me.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what. Yeah, he says that we sell this lie. He said of the
Mm.
Emerald Isle, and it is green, but it's just grassland.
Just grass.
I mean, it's so rare to find yourself running through a forest. I mean,
Gosh.
way, way more rare than even in England, which is not exactly, the most forested
Yeah.
country in the world. But
Yeah.
yeah, they definitely, hopefully I can create a conversation in Ireland if the book does well enough.
That would be brilliant. Sustainability has always been your kind of baseline,
Yeah.
Adharanand. And now you host these wonderful running retreats and writing retreats in Devon where you make sure that they're easily accessible by public transport and the food is entirely plant based as well, isn't it? Do you think that green passion has always just been there, waiting to find its way on the trails?
Yeah. I mean, they are vegetarian rather than purely vegan. We kind of, yeah, initially we did have one meal where there was a meat option, but we've cut that out. But yeah, but yeah, they're all accessible by train. We kind of base them around train stations, and if they're and we also offer lifts. I mean, the base is only a mile from the train station, but if people have got big bags, we'll go and pick them up, and we do one run across Dartmoor where we start at Oakhampton train station in the north of the moor and finish at the south of the moor at Ivy Bridge train station. So yeah, we try and make them all accessible.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I think yeah, for some reason I was yeah, right. I feel like I was brought up vegetarian. I think my parents were quite into being eco. I mean, they were hippies, so I guess that came with that. Particularly back then, that was kind of being a hippie meant being kind of caring for nature and that kind of stuff. So I was kind of brought up with that ethos, I think. And yeah, it just made sense. I mean, having written about green issues when I first started writing, I've always been aware of the nuances and the importance of the debate. I just think any right-minded person has got to take this issue seriously. I mean, the
Mm.
world, the planet we live on is the planet we live on, and sometimes it blows my mind the way, they start saying, "Oh, net zero is like causing the economy to, struggle. We should get rid of it." It's like the economy is not as important as the planet.
Yeah,
I know it's important, and I know people need to have enough money, but you know, it's not quite. And and
100%.
and what was amazing was when COVID happened, suddenly all that stuff about the economy and like, you can't even have, they kind of act like not everything's so important that productivity is everything. And then suddenly we were all taking 4 months off work, and there was plenty of
Right.
money around, and flights were all stopped, and somehow the world kept spinning, and everyone survived, and it wasn't so crucial for a few moments. And it's like, yeah, if you treat it seriously enough, of course it's workable. There are economic solutions around this. So it blows my mind that people don't take it seriously. Of course, I'm very aware, and I know this is a big Green Runners thing, that obviously individual action can only help so much. And so, yeah, it's interesting because I set the camps up locally to me, and we use all local people, like, and that was the idea. It wanted to feel very like a bunch of friends in this local area, showing everyone the local area. But obviously, everywhere is local to somewhere, to someone, and far away to someone else. And we've had people fly in from
Yeah.
America for the weekend, which wasn't what I was planning. But at the same time, I'm not going to say, "Oh, you can't come because you're American and you live too far away." So, but yeah, and then we actually do, so I do a retreat in Chamonix as well. But I mean, again, we have people come from Europe to come to it,
Mm.
and also we offer a big discount if you come by train, and a couple, people every year take that
Amazing.
option. So we try and make it eco, but obviously we don't stop people. I'm not like the Green Run. I love that about the Green Runners. They're not saying, God, if you get on a flight once in your year, you're banished.
No, we don't like to do that at all. We realize everyone has to travel and everyone's human and yeah,
Yeah,
let's just doing the
and
best
also
way.
running's interesting because it's such an international sport that, I mean, for me, I haven't run abroad for quite a few years now, but it's easy for me to not do that, having run all these amazing races. But also, if you're an elite runner, it's much harder because it's an international sport,
Of course.
and it's okay if you live in Europe, great.
Yeah.
You've got loads of races in Europe, you can get to the train. But if you're Australian and you want to be a runner, you're going to have to travel. So there has to be, and I think there is a way of, if this issue is taken seriously enough, there's a way, like I say, the governments could sort it out. I'm sure the
Mm.
billionaires could sort it out if they wanted to.
If only.
And so I don't know how, yeah, I mean, not much I can do generally, but as long as I'm just trying to navigate that. We're all trying to navigate that. And yeah, so at least in
Yeah.
my camps, I'm trying not to. It's interesting in the journalism as well. And I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, I got offered a place at the Kingston Marathon in Jamaica. And I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. Yeah, like a week in Jamaica, you run the
Mm.
Kingston Marathon, write an article. And I did it. And now I'm thinking, what has changed recently? Yeah, well, that was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I don't, so that's the sort of thing I wouldn't do now. And even though obviously some people live in Jamaica, but I don't think many of the Guardian's readers, a large proportion are from Jamaica. That seems like a really unnecessary
Mm.
journey that I wouldn't make now. But if I got a place, I trained for the UTMB or some race, and I got a place there, I wouldn't begrudge anyone going off and doing it. It's like it's finding your own path through it all. I think is important, and so that doesn't stop you living, but also keep that in mind. I think, and like I say, when I was looking where to do my pilgrimage, I could have gone down the Andes or something, but there's it was part of the equation was like Ireland is just there, and I can go and experience
Sure.
Ireland right there, and we can drive, catch the boat across, and we're there. But obviously, for someone else who lives in Chile, Ireland would be a
A
million
long
miles.
way. For somebody listening who wants to get into trail running but feels totally overwhelmed by the pressure to buy all the high-tech gear, the
Oh,
newest
yeah.
carbon-plated shoes, and all the high-emission travel that we just talked about, what's your advice for keeping it simple, green, and joyful?
Ooh. Well, I mean, ultra running requires a lot of gear, but I don't. Trail running generally, it depends where you live. I mean, I'm lucky. I live in South Devon, so I haven't been abroad for a few years, and I've just been exploring more and more the local area. And I think lockdown was a good lesson for that. So in lockdown, I had a couple of set routes, but suddenly I had more time on my hands and I started exploring. But what I realized is, so I used to think, oh, if I go down that lane and I don't know where it goes, so I'm not going to go down there. But if you just see a trail and you go down it, it's just fun. If you go down and it just turns up into a nettle bramble patch, well, just come back. What's the big deal? You're still running, you're still having fun, you're still out and about. So just go exploring would be one thing. Not worry about having to turn back. Yeah, I mean, I don't think. I mean, obviously, you do need in the winter in the UK, you need a bit more kit. Like you do need trail shoes. I'd say. I don't think any old shoes will do, but they don't have to be expensive ones. There's lots of Vinted and everywhere else you can get your trail shoes. You do probably need a decent rain jacket, but apart from that, I don't think you need that much. There's a lot like the nutrition is. I mean, some of those things are very useful. Some of those bars and stuff when you're in an ultra marathon itself. But yeah, just for your own running, you can just bring some nuts, some dates, some chocolate, some sweets, whatever you got. I think it's become quite yeah. There's a lot of commercial people selling gear and like if you go on Instagram, there's a lot of and some of them they make it look really cool and you think, oh God, if I had that. I don't, I don't know. It's subconscious, isn't it? You don't even think consciously, oh, I need that. But you just subconsciously you think you do. But I think it's really simple. But it's easy for me to say. If you live in a city, it's a bit harder. But one thing is to get a train and then run back. So even if it's one station or two station, depending how fit you feel like you are, plan it before you go on Google Maps. There are loads of ways of doing it. You maybe have to get quite creative. But parks. I mean, England's blessed with parks and rights of way. I say in Ireland, it's tricky. It's much harder. You do have to run on the roads a lot of the time. Where England, we actually, and Scotland, and particularly Wales, we're super blessed with our rights of access. And there are. I mean, I used to live in East London, and there are all sorts of like near Finsbury Park. There's a kind of hidden railway line that not many people seem to know about. Like a disused railway line that you can run along down by the Lee Valley. There's all sorts of hidden little places. So it's really exploring, I think. And that's part of the fun of it as well. There's a great book about the Ethiopian running. Someone did write one eventually. And they go off and they don't run these set routes and don't worry about time and stuff because, you know, and it amazes me that the Ethiopians who are like, so these guys are running world records and stuff, and they go on these runs where they've no set time, they've no set route, and they zigzag through the woods, and they end up climbing over rocks, going through bramble bushes. And I experienced this, but in the book, he asked them, why do you do this? He was really shocked. He was like a 2:15 marathon runner. So he went out there expecting like serious training. I mean, these guys are running 2:02 or whatever. I'm going to learn something. And they're scrambling through the undergrowth and climbing over rocks. And he said, what's the point of this? Why are you doing this? And they said, oh, it's fun. And he's like, it just blew his mind. He's like, what? You're like elite athletes having fun? That's interesting.
Brings it back just to the joy of running
Yeah,
again, doesn't
yeah,
it?
yeah. It's
Absolutely.
really interesting. Yeah,
Going back to the Ethiopia topic and talking to you over this interview, it sounds to me like you have so many stories which maybe didn't quite make it into your books. You've got Ethiopia, you've got the train journey to
yeah,
Japan, and all these amazing tales that people would love to read about or hear about. So you've also got your podcast, The Way
yeah.
of the Runner, which people can listen to. So before I let you go, I'd like you to tell everybody where they can tune into your podcast, find out about your books, and
Yeah.
sign up for one of your running and writing camps in Devon. And also, when should we set our calendar alert for the running pilgrim?
Oh, yeah. So, well, at the moment we haven't got a fixed. I'll go backwards. We haven't got a fixed publication date, but I've been told it's February next year. So there's plenty of time. I'm sure I'll be. So I'm on all sorts of social medias. So I'm sure I'll be telling everybody about it once I know an exact date. Uh, yeah, the retreats, we have a website, thewayofTherunner.com. That has the podcast and the running retreats all on there, thewayofTherunner.com. Yeah, and then those pieces are. So I also have a Patreon page, which is just my name. If you search my name at Patreon, I do a weekly. I don't know whether you call it a column, a newsletter, dispatch, or something from my life. But I also put up all those bits that were edited out. There was also a whole kind of postscript story, which happened with a couple of the runners in Running with the Kenyans, Japhet and Beatrice, and Shadrach, actually, three of them in different guises. There's a whole there's a whole story about what happened after the book in that, particularly with Japhet. I managed to get him races aboard, and he has a whole subsequent story of how he kind of faltered and faltered and faltered, and then eventually there's this amazing success at the Edinburgh Marathon after about his fifth attempt. So that story's up there. So yeah, that's just, if anyone knows Patreon, it's like a site where people can support artists and writers and things, and you pay about £4 a month to be a supporter. And I actually have a book club on there, and there's all sorts of things. So we have a little community, which is fun. But yeah,
Brilliant.
that's about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we will make sure that every single one of those links is right there in the show
Brilliant.
notes for everyone to find. Adharanand, thank you so much for bringing your warmth, your stories, and your incredible journey to us today. It has been an absolute joy.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. And to everyone at home or out on a beautiful trail right now, hopefully enjoying the fresh air, keeping it simple and keeping it green. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, take care of each other and happy running. Thanks for listening to Storytime with the Green Runners. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like and share to make sure you never miss a story.